Why are cities important? And why should we care about getting city regions right? Watch the Urban Queue to know what it takes to shape a city that works for all. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Urban Queue. Today we are in conversation with Mr. Alain Bertaud. Alain is an urbanist, a researcher, and a thought leader in the domain of urban and economic planning. A senior fellow at Marron Institute at New York University, he recently wrote a book about urban planning titled Order Without Design: How Markets Shape Cities. Alain's work aims to bridge the gap between operational urban planning and urban economics. His work focuses primarily on the interaction between urban forms, real estate markets, and regulations. So we are here today to talk about cities, people, and how do we plan for and get to people-centered, high-functioning urban areas. Welcome, Alain. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you on our podcast, Urban Q.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Alain, to start off with, I would like to ask you a question about, as a scholar and an urban planner, you've worked in cities around the world, in the East, in the West, and Global South, San Salvador, New York, Paris, you name it. So my first question to you is, what does a city represent to you?
For me, a city are really the people who live there. And it's a meeting place. It's meeting people that you don't expect. By the way, meeting people also you don't agree with necessarily, and coexisting. So that's what a city is all about, I think. And so building, of course, are important. The environment of a city are important. This is icing on the cake, let's say, which is it's very important, but basically, the interest of cities is meeting new people in a different way and things like that. So it's really about people. And this is why, by the way, it's so difficult to create a new city, because there is nobody there. So who will come to a place, even if the buildings are fantastic, if the sewer system is the most efficient, who will come to a city without people?
Absolutely. So basically, cities are meant for interactions, and you can't manufacture interactions unless the people are there. So
that's right. Yes.
Wonderful. So, and of all the cities that you have lived and worked in, which one is your favorite?
Look, I have a lot of favorite cities. Again, I've been living with my wife a nomadic life. Our three children were born in all three different countries, and I don't, I have no attachment to a special place. I enjoy very much being in New York. I enjoy visiting Paris, Mumbai, Ahmedabad, Shanghai, Hong Kong, or Sao Paulo. But I have no. I have a preference personally for high density cities. I enjoy Hong Kong very much. I enjoy Mumbai very much, Shanghai or Sao Paulo. But I have no specific attachment. I could live anywhere, and that was even my wife was living. We were ready to move anytime, and we have moved many times. Mm-hmm. And so cities again are like people. Depending, if you want to go to a concert, you will have a certain friend you will go with. If you want hiking in the mountain, probably it will be a different person. Yeah. And for me, cities are like that.
That's very interesting. That's a very cool perspective, and you're lucky to have a partner who's supporting, you moving from place to place and is able.
That's right. Yes. That was essential. I had a partner, unfortunately.
So, Alain, coming to your work now, a lot of your work is focusing on urban economics and how that's important. And you've said that as an urban planner yourself, your goal is to translate the theories and the complicated equations and sometimes the jargon of urban economics into methods that support concrete decision making in the everyday world. So, how do you envision the role of urban economists in planning good cities, people-oriented, low-carbon cities?
I think that the advantage of economists is that they are quantitative. They like to measure things. They usually, most of them, do not have a preconceived idea of what they want to understand how a city works. Planners have a tendency, because like myself, they are architects as background or engineers, so they like to create new things, and without quite understanding that a city already exists, that they are not going to transform a city. So the role of economy, in a way, I compare myself to a family doctor when I go to a city. And imagine a family doctor who will not understand the role of a lung or heart in physiology.
Right.
Economists are the one who understand what is a function of a heart or a lung. And so the two have to work together. I'm not saying that economists should lead planning. Urban planners have a knowledge of the physical world, the spatial dimension, which is indispensable. Uh, many of my economist friends have sometimes difficulty reading maps or changing the scale of a map. That's something planners don't know how to do. So I think it's complementary, but definitely, to plan a city, ignoring the income of people who live there, ignoring the price of land, and imposing consumption. When you design a city, if you design land use regulation, you are imposing a consumption of land and floor space and infrastructure to people. And you had better make sure that those people can afford that.
Yeah.
Or that's their preference. Sometimes also it's preference. It's not necessarily affordability.
That's very interesting. It's not a role of substitution. It is about how do you bring that entire holistic.
That's right. Yes. 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 Yes.
Yeah. So, from one of the cities that you might have worked in, can you share an example of how what you're saying and how that whole integration has helped shape the way an urban planning department has approached planning in a city? How they might have incorporated economic development planning in the work that they do.
So, to answer your question, I think that the city now, which is closer to what I think should be, although it's not yet perfect, is Ahmedabad. If you look at Ahmedabad, for me, a successful city is a city which has provide enough land, developable land, to accommodate many income, and at the same time have an infrastructure that allow the labor market to work. That means not only going to your job, whatever it is, but having access to all the jobs in the city, because the labor, the transport system allow you to go from one side of the city to another in less than 1 hour. And I think that Ahmedabad, while not there is nothing such thing as perfection, is not perfect. I think it came closer. I monitor. I mean, I go to Ahmedabad regularly. I started working there in 1982, and my last visit was in January. So I've been at least every once a year, mostly, and I monitor. They give me data, of course, about what they do, but for me, I look at Google Earth, and then I spend a lot of time looking at those images, and I see the change, and I see that now you you have a lot of formal housing which cater to much different income group. Where before you had slums on one side, or the Gamtal, the village, which were catering to low income housing, and then you had formal housing, and there was a gap in between. And I don't see this gap now. I see a continuity, and less informal and more formal, but formal low income, without being subsidized. That's not public housing, but the market is about supply. And I think this is possible because of the town planning schemes, which have been at a big, most all the states in India have a town planning law practically. I think Gujarat is the only one which is successful in using the town planning scheme to provide a very elastic supply of land.
Yes, and actually coming to the question of land and affordability in cities and in Indian cities, and since you mentioned Ahmedabad, one of the challenges we find in cities like bigger cities in India like New Delhi and Mumbai pertains
Yes,
to
yes,
housing. There's a paradox of high housing costs and at the same time high vacancy rates. So do you
yes.
think planning can help address this problem? This is very dichotomous that way.
Yes, planning not in, again, designing in advance, but in monitoring what is happening. And the role of the planner really is to provide infrastructure. The role of the planner is not to tell people you should live there and your lot should be 500 square meter. The job of the planner is to say, oh, this is where you want to live and this is your income. We are going to provide you a safe water supply. We are going to remove the garbage. We are going to provide transport to go from any place in the city. This is their role. And this is a bit top down. So you see, the city is a mix of spontaneous order. The way people decide to spend their money on, how much they can spend on housing, for instance, is personal. You cannot decide in advance. People have to spend 30% of their income on housing. You don't know.
Right.
And so this is a spontaneous order. Where they want to live, how much they want for land, how much for floor space. Your job is to monitor that very carefully and then provide the infrastructure and the infrastructure that they can afford. That's so that's a role of planner really. And in India, I think there was an anti-city bias. You had a lot of law. For instance, um, in the 30 years ago, uh, there was a lot of regulation. For instance, something like the Urban Land Sinking Act. You are too young to know about it, but I worked under the Urban Land Sinking Act. It was an anti-city regulation. The idea also that every state in India should have the same amount of urbanization is not correct. If you are living in Himachal Pradesh, it's very different from living in Punjab, or Tamil Nadu. So I think that this really starves the successful cities like Mumbai from infrastructure, and at the same time invested in infrastructure in state which had not much chance of urbanizing very much. And I think it was a misallocation of resource. And also the idea that if you establish high standards of housing, then you will prevent migration. There was this idea that people are dumb, especially low-income people, and they move to cities because they don't know what's good for them. That living in a village in India is wonderful. You have these mango trees and it's beautiful. If you live in the city and spend the weekend there, it's wonderful. But if a villager, goes to a slum of Mumbai and you look at those slums, you say, this is terrible. It means that the life in their village is worse, although you as a affluent city dweller, you don't know about it. So this India suffered of an anti-urban bias very, very strongly.
Right. And I mean, the Indian infrastructure, I mean, most of it is, especially with cities, is yet to be built, and we have
Yes,
to see if cities can actually, catch up on that. But you made an interesting point about allowing citizens to make choices according to what they wish, and then planners finding ways to support that choices. In fact, in your book, Order Without Design, you say that planners should allow citizens to make more trade-offs freely for themselves. So
right, yes, yes.
can you explain how this can help address existing challenges like urban inequality, particularly?
That's right. Yes, that's right. You see, the idea that uh, if you are managing a city and you are part necessarily of the elite, because of education, and you decide, you look at the poor, in slums, and you say, oh, this is, they deserve much better. we are going to design something for them. And of course, they cannot afford it. So we will pay for it, don't worry. In fact, you never deliver, you deliver maybe 1% of the need of the poor, and the rest are pushed into slums, which are much worse than they will be if the slums were considered normal land use development, and if they, from the beginning they had, some layout for streets and were provided water supply. And so you are, by pretending to be generous, by saying no, the poor have to all live in at least 60 square meter per apartment, thing like that. You are in fact playing a bad trick on poor people. But it was also a way of keeping migrants out. For saying they should stay in their village. They didn't realize that those migrants were creating the future labor force of the city.
That's right. And when it comes to that, whether it's city residents, whether it's migrants, there seems to be, do you think there is a conflict between, people's desire for compact neighborhoods, and being able to work, live close to where you work and, get your amenities, and the nature of regional growth and the land markets that we're seeing today? And if so, can this be resolved?
When you talk about compact city, and in a way, a number of planners in India traditionally thought that the market was against compact cities. It's just the opposite. Every developer wants to have an FSI much higher than the one is allowed to go. Look at all the land use regulation, not only in India, in New York, everywhere. All of them, you will not find one which will push people to use less land. Every one of them, minimum floor space, maximum density, number of dwelling units per acre, FSI, setbacks, all this regulation force you to use more land and more floor space that you would normally. That's why those regulations are there. In a way, if you have an FSI, for instance, like you have of 133 in Mumbai for many years, this FSI meant if you are left to your own device, you will want to have a higher FSI that consume less land, but we want you to consume more land. So don't complain about sprawl. If all your regulations are forcing people to use more land, and if you force them to use more land and they cannot afford this land next to their job, next to the city, well, they will go further away because that's the only place where the land is cheap, because nobody wants to go there. Land is cheap not again because of a conspiracy or something like that. It's because there is no demand. So demand, that's where markets are interesting, that prices tell you messages. Now, prices sometimes are distorted, but they tell you something. It's a bit like, again, a medical comparison again. If you have a high fever, it's a message that your body is sending. So the goal is not to cool you down, to put you in a cold bath. The goal is to find why you have this fever, why you have an infection somewhere. You have to find it. And that's the way you will be cured. So if you have a very high prices in land, you have to find why. It is not speculation. It is not that bad people are exploiting others. It's a shortage of land, and a lot of people want to be closer to the city, but they can't because there is not enough. There is enough land, but not enough floor space is allowed to be built in this city.
So basically, you're saying that, how do we get regulations basically can get in the way of efficiency and can get in the way of, basically, can lead to costly outcomes, which don't necessarily need to be there because that's not what the people desire. That's not what markets.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
That how do you get regulations to work with market forces and not against them or at loggerheads?
Well, markets cannot work without regulations. You have to have transparency, for instance, but there are some regulation, like say fire regulation or sanitation regulation, that the consumer cannot decide by himself. If I move in a building in New York, I want to be sure that this building will not take fire, and within 20 minutes it will be consumed. And that, as a consumer, I have no way of knowing that. So only people who are who are expert in fire regulation can divide the regulation. Now, sometimes maybe fire regulation do not adapt very well to new technology. It's possible, it should be revised, but it's something which has been done by a committee of experts, which make it. And again, an economist probably will be useful there too, so that you don't have a regulation which, after September 11 in New York, people were advocating having skyscraper will resist a Boeing full of fuel bumping into it. So if we had this regulation, then of course there would be no skyscraper ever. You could not build it. So you have to take into account that. But so those regulations are important. Now, what is consumption? That the consumer can see. That means again the minimum floor space, the size of room, the way they are configured. I think it should be left to the consumer. And the same with land. The FSI should be left to the consumer. So some planners argue, but if we limit FSI, then we can have an infrastructure which corresponds to a density that we project. So I say, wait a minute here. You are making a projection. A projection is a guess. And then you want everybody to fulfill your guess, where, if you decide that a neighborhood of Mumbai is going to be low density, so you design a sewer system or a water system which is insufficient for a high density. And you say, well, from now on, for the next 50 years, we will maintain this low density because that's the way I thought it was. It's wrong. It's much cheaper to redo the infrastructure, to add a water pipe, than to push people 10 kilometers away because they cannot afford the land you prescribe. So that's, those, and that again, where economists are useful, planners have a tendency not to take serious, because they don't understand market, do not take seriously land prices, again, as a signal. So if they don't take prices seriously, very often I read things that they, a master plan, and they say, low-income housing will be able to live there, providing land prices and interest rate are reasonable. They use the word reasonable. There is no such thing as a reasonable land price. It's just a question of supply and demand.
Absolutely, and that is very true. And you compared planners to how we need to be general physicians. But my last question to you, Elaine, basically is that given your experience, what is the best way to get these general physicians to work with the specialists and other sort of stakeholders? How do you get planners to work with businesses, elected officials, decision makers, and citizens, most importantly,
Yes.
to shape better cities?
I think that we should have in our university first, we should have urban planning and economists work in the same department. They will be obviously macroeconomists will work in a different department, but say specialized urban economists work side by side, with architects and urban planners. And that so basic economics is understood in the same way as an architect might not be a structural engineer, but he understands the engineering of structure. He raises, material resistance and things like that. He has a knowledge of that. And so he knows when, for instance, if this architect design a structure, a high rise, he knows that he needs the help of a structural engineer to calculate the size of beams and things like that. And I think it should be the same thing. An urban planner should be able to know when he has to get the help of an urban economist, or to understand the signal that prices are giving to him. And then, of course, in the case of India, that will mean the IS officers also will have to be trained into that. So how do you, that's beyond me to say how IS officers should be trained, but certainly they will have to have some understanding of microeconomics. If they are, if they become a commissioner, urban commissioner, or housing commissioner, or something like that.
No, that's very important. And of course, when we're talking about cross-disciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, and how in the world that we live in today, we cannot solve our problems to be a very bit of a myopic approach. I think that starts, you're absolutely right. It starts from your education. It starts from your college and the schools where you're being trained. It starts from training institutes where, whether
That's
you're
right. Yes.
a class or a professional, where you're getting trained. So I absolutely agree with you, Elaine, on that one. So thank you. This has been a fascinating conversation, and it's always a pleasure reading about your work, your book, especially a great read for me personally. And congratulations on the fantastic work that you're doing on urban transformation, Elaine, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.